Hey guys, we're back with the notes for 11.2. So what I'm going to have you do today is write everything first and then we'll talk. So I'm going to pause it in 3 different sections, write down what you see, and then we'll talk. Okay, so pause the screen right now, copy what you see. Perfect. I'm going to have you go down to this section, pause the screen, copy what you see. Wonderful. Okay, so let's talk about what's on this page. Basically, we're going to go over parent functions again. The first one's going to start at 1 and multiply by 2. The second one is a decay, so it's going to start at 1 and then cut in half. You should notice that these are the exact same numbers. They're just backwards. So 1 is growing by doubling every time. 1 is decaying by cutting in half every time. We know those are opposites. Okay? But the most important thing I want you to see on here is that blue dashed line. That blue dashed line is called our asymptote. I don't know if we've talked about it in every class, but that blue dashed line is the asymptote. He is a line that blocks the graph. Okay, it's kind of like an electric fence. You cannot touch it. So no matter if I keep cutting my numbers in half every time, I'm going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, but I will never get to 0. I will never touch that line. So as we look at some of these vocabulary words, I want you to keep that in mind. My asymptote is at y equals 0. It's a horizontal line. It's sitting on the 0 line. The point of that is that I cannot have an x-intercept. The x-intercept is being blocked by the asymptote, so I don't have one on either graph. I do have a y-intercept. In Algebra 1, you can just memorize that. It's my a value. So if I go back up into the equation, that yellow dot, that's my initial value. That's my y-intercept. It's where I hit the y-axis. Okay? For domain, because there are arrows on both sides of this graph, on the pink one, arrows going right, arrows going left, we are going to use all real numbers. Okay? The range is something that's going to be a little bit new to you. We are talking about, oops, let me erase that. That was my bad. Will you guys go ahead and double check? Make sure that on this range you don't have an equal to. On this graph, will you double check and make sure you do not have an equal to? Okay, that was super important. I'm glad I caught that. So on these problems, you are either going to be higher than the asymptote or lower than the asymptote. If you're higher, then we're going to say I'm greater than that number. If you're lower than it, we're going to say you're less than that number. So my asymptote on these problems is at 0. I am greater than 0. I can't touch it, so I'm not going to be equal to. Okay? Before I let you loose, I want to go over more problems with asymptote and with range. Will you jump back to page 164? And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Will you write these down for me, please? On page 164, will you write this down for me, please? Pause the screen if you need to. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about it. So in asymptote, we know we can't touch it. We know it's a y equals number. And we know that for range, I'm either greater than it or less than it because it's where my graph sits. So on this first example that I gave you, my asymptote, and that's in pink, is at 2. So I would say it's y equals 2. But for my graph, the blue line, I would say I'm higher than the asymptote. So my y is greater than 2. Can't be equal to, I don't touch it. Okay? On that second problem, my asymptote line is at 3. So I would say what? Asymptote's y equals 3. I'm lower than it. So I would say y is less than 3. My blue graph is under 3. Okay? You don't have to write these next 2 problems down, but I just want to go over 2 more examples. Okay, so on the first one, or problem 3, my line is at -3. So my asymptote, y equals -3. For my graph, I'm higher than it. So I'm going to say y is greater than -3. Not equal to because I can't touch it. Last problem, my asymptote is at -1. So y equals -1. My blue graph, my function, is lower than that line. So I'm going to say y is less than -1. It is not equal to because I cannot hit it. Okay? All right. You guys have, I think, 8 or 9 questions. I think 8. You were doing the 11.2 practice, pages 170 to 171. All right. Go ahead and get started. Come see me if you have questions.